Look, first of all, thank you very much everyone for giving up your time coming here this evening. We've got some real expertise alongside me. My job is to try and referee or officiate, draw that knowledge out. Hopefully we can keep it reasonably light-hearted and informal. But just by way of introduction, we have Hugh Brayshaw, who's actually the European Marketing Manager for North Sails, but he's a very successful short-handed sailor who's a product of the Artemis Academy. He's probably best known at the moment as one of the lead coaches for the Griffin project, which he gives up a lot of his spare time, and I suspect a little bit of work time as well doing. So Hugh, thank you for joining us. Next we have Ronan Grealish, who's one of our sales team, sales experts at North Sails. Ronan is particularly strong in areas such as IRC and short-handed racing. Many of you may well have dealt with him in the past. He also competes at Grand Prix level on boats such as Jet2. So thank you very much, Ronan, for coming this evening. And then last but not least, Campbell Field, who is a expert navigator, world-renowned navigator. He does weather routing. He's also an electronics expert, and I had the pleasure of sailing with last year. And if any of you get caught in the bar with him later, I'm sure he will be telling you that he's on a winning streak, having just won the Baltic 600, the Transatlantic race, the Caribbean 600, and he managed to jag the St. Bart's bucket last week as well. So Campbell, thanks for joining us. I think we're going to play a short video to just have a little taste of the Fastnet race. Anyway, tonight is all about preparing for the race, and as I said, I sailed with Campbell last year, so I've witnessed firsthand just how detailed his preparation is. So to start with, we're going to look more on the navigation side. Maybe, Campbell, you can give us a bit of insight as to how you will go about preparing for the race this year.
Sure, thanks Ian. The easy bit really for the Fastnet is to put your entry in and get an entry accepted, and right at that point in time is when you start looking through the really important stuff, mainly all the rules. Appendix RV, for example, is newly introduced as opposed to racing under ERCAS during the night time and racing under Sailing Part 2 during the daytime. So it's actually worth studying and having a look at that and what the implications are. The second thing, which is a big one, which I find sometimes gets left a little bit too late, is looking at comms. I mean, a very connected world today. There's a lot of weather information available. There's social media that people like to keep up with. And so whether that's going to be via a 4G router or Starlink or something like that, it's worth actually thinking about what you want to do and making it work very effectively for you during the race. You may get some limitations with 4G. You're going to get areas where you can't get information. And you know, that can sometimes put you on a little bit of a back foot unless you've planned forward and made sure just as the signal's fading as you make your way into the Celtic Sea that you've got the latest position reports and things and the latest weather.
I've got to stop you right there. Can you get 4G at the Fastnet Rock?
Pass.
Yeah.
I have.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's good. Good audience participation. Well done. Okay, so you can get your last weather as you leave the Scillies and then as you round the rock. So.
Yeah, you can, as long as you've got roaming on your 4G router or however it's set up. I mean, the point is, if you've got it, you've got to make it as effective as possible. I mean, it's probably not beyond the reach of most people now, like even renting a Starlink Mini, something like that. But do it now, don't think about doing it 2 weeks before the start of the race, because there's all the interfacing to be done, there's power consumption issues or things like that. Further down the track, within a few months of the start of the race, you really need to start thinking about what you're going to access in terms of weather, what you want to use. There's a massive amount of information out there. We can't look at all the information and try and distill all that information down to what we want to use on the racetrack. You need to pick the ones that you know and trust or you understand. And that includes subscriptions. You know, if you're going to use Predict Wind, get inside Predict Wind. If you're going to use Squid, get inside Squid. Understand what you can get, when you can get it, and what it's going to mean to you. The second thing in the months building up is the calibration of your boat. We should be looking at that every time, but as we know, the Fastnet's a very tidal race, so if you want to understand a little bit better the reality of the tide models you've got, your boat speed needs to be calibrated very well as your compass. And similarly, your true wind angles and all your true wind speeds, because you want to try and validate your weather forecasts. So you might be thinking that the weather forecast is wrong as opposed to your instruments being out. It's just as valid though, if you know that you can't get these things absolutely perfect, is to at least understand what the limitations are on your instruments and your calibration so that you can revert back to Mark 1 eyeball and your instinct as well. And that sort of boils down to as well, don't go in the weeks before the start and get the charting or the navigation software that you want to use. Be using it well in advance so you've got some muscle memory, machine learning, so you know how to use it effectively when you're tired and on the race. In the days building up to the race, it's a really good idea to start running your race scenario every day. I like to do it every morning and every evening. Start to understand what your strategy starts to look like for the race, so it starts to get burned into your memory. You start developing an idea of what are going to be really important parts of the race for you, and it also helps you to sort of commit the course, what the hazards are and what the challenges are going to be as they develop. And distilling it down to day one, the day before the start, make your final strategy, write it down, have an idea of when you need to make key decisions, what information you need to make those decisions, so that on start morning you're focusing on getting out there, enjoying the environment, enjoying the start, not sitting there thinking to yourself, am I going to go right or left as I come out of Hurst. That start day modification really it should be quite subtle, and you should keep it quite simple. I always refer back to Occam's razor. If you hear hoof prints, think horses, not zebras. Don't overcomplicate it. Don't think that usually the simplest answer is the best answer to be able to modify your strategy and get underway.
Very good, thank you. It does depend where you are, of course. Some parts of the world there's probably more zebras than horses.
Yeah.
Next, we're going to move on to the boat, and I was thinking about your strategy, your start day modification. Our start day modification last year was not to go, so we decided to go and have lunch rather than set off in wind conditions, and that was because we weren't adequately prepared for all wind conditions. It was a decision that we made as a team, and ultimately we decided not to start because we weren't as ready, so we weren't as prepared as we needed to be to take on this race in those conditions. So that was a decision we made. But Hugh, I know you've even retired from a couple of races maybe, so and I'm sure you're telling all the youngsters at Griffin Project how to prepare their boats, so give us a few nuggets on just preparing the boat, both sort of ahead of time and just ahead of the race.
Yeah, sure. Yes, some mistakes to learn from myself. So I've started 4 Fastnets, which and only finished 2, which is kind of rookie numbers looking around the room in that sense. But there's a couple of mistakes that we majorly had that disappointing decision to turn around and head for the closest port. One of those was we made a bit of a fitting change to our bowsprit, which at the lead up was fine, but we found that at the Lizard there was a bit of a leak that was getting bigger through the hull there. So that was one thing to point on the hull fittings around the boat, just constantly checking that through the race to start with, but also right now the lead up, just to make sure that that's all watertight as it should be. And then the other race that we had to retire from was a rig error. So we lost our D2. This was 2021, where it was again very windy start around Portland. So we lost that, couldn't get it kind of fitted back to the mast again. So unfortunately had to turn around. So those are our 2 errors. But then the last edition, we spent a lot of time looking after the boat and getting the boat prepped. And kind of one of the tips was just go and find some heavy weather and get out there, so that actually when we had to start the Fastnet, we could go out there in 40 knots and be confident with our boat and stay in one piece. We were talking about this before. We could go on to boat preparation for a long time, but I think a lot of these things that we know, trying to find one single rig setting for the whole race. We know we can't change the rig as we go around, so finding that setting that's going to be kind of tight enough for the 30-40 knots, but also we're still going to have some nice set sails in the lighter stuff. And then and the hull finish. So the drag through water is 1,000 times more than air. So anything you can do to the hull to get that as smooth as possible is going to be a massive change as a performance side of things. And then I think the other thing that we kind of realised that the last Fastnet was things just flying out on the deck, safety gear. I think we lost our Dan buoy, which is a bit awkward, and someone finding that and thinking that we've got a man overboard and we don't, but also down below we had a lot of stowage issues, and I think there was a few kind of close calls and close injuries that we could have had by slipping or dropping onto something. So yeah, those are some of the boat prep tips that we had from our mistakes, I suppose.
So what I'm hearing there is it's not just a question of check this, check that. It's a question of getting out there and practicing in those conditions, because there's nothing quite like that to really put the boat to the test. So I completely agree with the watertightness. When you sail on a boat that's filling with water, you spend the whole time bailing, where you're completely soaked down below. It's not really that much fun, and yet with not too much effort, we could have in the past done a much better job. Yeah, exactly. And I think we talk a lot about the heavy stuff as well, but typically there's going to be those moments where there's going to be no wind at all, and I haven't kedged in the Fastnet, but have done in plenty of RORC races. And we were saying beforehand, it's a race to, particularly for the type of boats that a lot of people are in, the 40-footers, it's a race to Portland Bill to make the tidal gate. And if you don't make it, then, and it's a light wind sort of situation, well, where are you gonna be in that spot? You could find yourself kind of off the bill in 30 metres of depth, and you've got to have a situation where you can kedge in that deep water, not using your sheets and your jib sheets to actually get enough line there, that eventually the anchor gets stuck and you have to cut them away, and then you've got no jib sheets for the rest of the race. So these things have happened. I think there is a famous Harold Cudmore story about that, but we better not go into that right now. They had to retire because they had no rope left by the end of it.
So yeah, so that is all part of the boat preparation. That the list could go on. And then the team, and Ian, you might be best to talk about getting a winning team and the most out of your team. But for us in the Griffin project, we've just we've had our selections of sailors, and we've placed them into 3 different teams. And within that, we've kind of designated roles. It's not all on one person's shoulders. So we have got a skipper. You need somebody who's going to make the decisions. But we've also got a mate. We've assigned a boat captain. We've assigned a navigator. We've assigned a chef as well. Or snacktician, as we like to call it, to make sure everyone's pretty happy. And so you've got the fundamentals of a team there, but also we spent a bit of time with a sports site that came in and used to work with the British sailing team and British kayaking, and now does a lot of team building within corporations and stuff. But he really kind of put those questions out there. At points where you are a bit tired and a bit hungry and wet and cold, you are going to get on each other's nerves a little bit, and that's natural. But it's kind of how you deal with that afterwards. It's not personal. You don't need to have a big falling out about it. As you get to the Fastnet Rock and you've got to do something, and then your team's not talking with each other. So we've kind of addressed some of those issues early. We've done a bit of personality testing. Who's what. Assigned people's colours. I can't quite remember what they are now, but red doesn't necessarily mean bad. They're a decision maker or something like that. So we've done a lot of this. They've done the team building, and this is something you can do within your teams as well. And I don't know if you've had any kind of insight and that sort of thing with the many teams you've had in.
Well, I've done it well and I've done it badly, and I mean, many of you probably already organised on who you're sailing with, I'm guessing, this year, pretty much, most of the crew. So I don't think we're talking about team selection, we're talking about how do we gel as a team. And I think one of the nice things about offshore sailing is that there's a chance for everybody to do lots of roles on the boat. Unlike inshore, where maybe one person steers and one person trims, one person does the bow. Offshore, you need a lot of people need to trim, a lot of people need to steer, and maybe you'll drop into your normal roles for manoeuvres, but you need more of an all-rounder team. That doesn't mean they all need to be stars. I always think the best teams are the ones that have got clear objectives. What are we actually doing this for? Are we just doing it as a challenge to say we're doing it? Are we doing it because we want to win? Are we, what is it? What is it that binds us together as a team? And I think when that's not matched up, and I always think back to I don't know, be careful what I say here, but if you think of maybe the Clipper race where people get put together and they might have very different aspirations from the race. Some people might be furiously competitive, some people might just be trying to run away from their job or their partner or whatever. And so, that's why those skippers do such a great job, because they have to take those people and they've got to somehow get them all aligned. So you need alignment, I think you need some kind of culture, you need some fun, but above all else I would say just agree on some objectives. What would make this successful? And that doesn't mean coming first, second, third necessarily, but if we achieve these things, we'll walk away from this race knowing that we've given it our best shot and feeling fulfilled through doing it, and we're all agreed in that. I think those kind of conversations are really worth their weight in gold, and it kind of sets the culture, and then you can draw on that when it is tough in the middle of the night, or someone's sick down below and needs some support, whatever it is. So I don't think this unless you're short-handed or single-handed. Well, short-handed is still a team event. When you've got a full crew, it is a team that you need, and you won't win the race without a strong team.
Yeah, and we touched on just a few more points with the crew prep. I think there's minimum requirements to have kind of safety and sea survival courses and first aid. I think we were saying that ideally probably you're trying to get every member of your team on those and do them together, like spend the day together and treat it as a bit of team building. You'll understand kind of who's a bit squeamish around the first aid sort of side of things, and you can support each other there, and who's struggling in the sea survival. So, but all of that is a part of the building the team aspect. And then those kind of 300 miles you need to get in to qualify for the Fastnet. I think I would say the Myth of Malin race, the RORC Myth of Malin race is fantastic for that. You're doing the first 120 miles of the race to start with. It's quite a fun one. You're doing at least probably 2 nights with your typical 40-footer, and that's a real good dry run, I think, of the race. So these are sort of things that within Griffin that we'll be trying to do. And then I'll touch a little bit on crew gear as well, because I'm used to sailing a double-handed boat where I could take quite a lot. So I could take a dry suit and then some, a couple of other sets of foulies. But I think if I brought that onto the boat this time with 8 of us, I'm going to get a bit of a weird look. So I think trying to keep your kit down when you're in a team to a smaller pack. Just one set of foulies. You can go with boots, or you can go with shoes. And again, we discussed this before, like try and test everything out before you end up on the start line of the Fastnet. We don't want to be unwrapping new life jackets or personal AAS beacons and that sort of thing. Get everything tested before you're going to go for the big race, because we are working up to this one race that we want to have it on.
Well, it's probably an opportunity for a plug for North Sails clothing at this point in time, but just in case you haven't bought your oilskins and you want the best oilskins out there, George Kingsnorth from North Sails Clothing is with us. I'm sure he'll be in the bar afterwards. Like you said, I think the biggest thing is just don't take something new for the first time on the race, and then you on the first night your trousers are leaking, or you find that something's rubbing on your skin or whatever it is that happens. You just need to test it. So get out there, test it that's why you do these trial races. It's not just about sailing the miles, it's about testing all the things that you're going to put into play, whether it's clothing, food, torches, watch systems, whatever it may be.
Yeah, like that. It's funny you mentioned that. Onto the watch system, and again,
not a bad segue, that was it?
But again, being a mostly short-handed sailor, I was very used to a 2 on, 2 off. Say hi and goodbye as you kind of cross the companionway and got back up on deck, and that was that. So I've got to do a little bit of figuring out how the watch is going to be within 8 people. But I guess you guys, same with bigger teams, you've gone through many different setups.
Let's put them on the spot. So watch system for the Fastnet, Ronan, what's your advice?
So generally I've been involved with boats that have a rolling watch system. I think it's really, really key that we don't do a full change of all the people that were on deck leaving and a whole new crew coming up. So we have a rolling system where essentially there's 3 watches, and if it's a 4-hour watch, every 2 hours there's a roll. So there's a flow of information. Any decisions that have been made are shared across those watches. So hopefully we have a less chance of making bad decisions or not getting the message across.
Campbell? You're a navigator, so you just wait the whole time.
I'm just asleep in the boat the whole time, according to the rest of the crew. But I just have to basically agree with Ronan because it's, well, my role as a navigator in the 4-hour watch systems and new weather updates and everything coming inside a 4-hour cycle, keeping watch captains up to speed is great as they come up, they get prepared, they come back, we have a chat about what the strategy is for the next hour, 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, and they can go on deck. But they're also, it's almost a case of you don't get Chinese whispers. They're not hearing third party through someone else what the strategy is, they're getting it correctly, and then they can pass it on to the half watch change as well. So it's just to keep everything seamless and everybody on the same page.
And what do I think? So, I don't think I've ever been on a boat where everyone's agreed on what the watch system should be. Very often the back of the boat has a different opinion to what the front of the boat might think. I've seen it done badly, I've done it myself badly. The kind of vacuum, a classic one, this happens a lot with me, is I might be tactician on a boat, so I do tactics, I don't know, say till sunset on the first night. And then they're like, oh Ian, you have a drive, so I'll start driving. But nobody thinks about who's now doing tactics. They just assume that you're still making the decisions, but you're also driving. And so then, you either do a bad job driving or you do a bad job of decision making. So that's because it hasn't been properly addressed of who's doing what, what's the responsibility, how do we change that over? I'm not, I think it's very boat specific, how weight sensitive is your boat on the rail as one example. What sleeping accommodation do you have down? You might only have 2 workable bunks, so you might have to cycle 2 people off deck and everybody else on deck, for instance. You might prioritise helmsmen, and particularly if you don't have many helmsmen or the conditions are particularly bad. There's a strong argument for pushing super hard until you're past Portland because it's a critical part of the race. So why would you rest anybody until you get past Portland? But there's a very strong argument for needing to keep people fresh because it's a 4 or 5 day race, not a 2-day race. So, I think you do need a system to fall back on, but I think you need to be prepared to flex. And I think you can generally, you can sort of predict what are the quiet parts of the race. When are we going to be on one tack for a long time? When is there light winds? We might be able to get more people down. I mean, I've done the Fastnet and it was downwind to the Rock, believe it or not, which goes against everything Campbell's going to tell you in a minute. But it was downwind to the Rock, and we had a good lead over the next boat, and so we just decided to rest everybody apart from one trimmer and one helm. We sailed the whole way across the Irish Sea with 6 down below and 2 on deck because we knew it was going to be upwind and hard on the way back, and we need the weight on the rail. So I think whatever happens, make a plan. You can always change the plan, make a plan. I would say don't be heroes and think you can stay up for 5 days. But equally, you don't need to be super rigid because you're not racing for 3 weeks. So, have I fudged the answer enough there? Yeah. Somewhere amongst all that. Okay, so Campbell, let's take a look at the course. Conscious of time, you could talk to us for an hour about rounding the lizard. But let's step back and let's just take a sort of aerial view of the race, what we might expect, and therefore what priorities may be.
Yeah, well, we all know what the race course is. We've all seen plenty of charts in 695 miles, but I actually approach this race from a slightly different angle. It's a race of 4 parts. If you go to the next slide, I kind of ignore the exit of the Solent. We all do that on a weekly, monthly basis. We know the tide's going to be going out at our start time. We've got a fair idea of how we're going to get out of the Solent. The race really starts for us, this leg starts for us. As we're exiting the Needles, if we can't make the Portland gate, we may be a bit further south, but we also have to bear in mind what is going to happen as we approach the Scillies on this leg 1. So it's once we get sort of towards the Scillies, we've got to start thinking about what we're going to do on leg 2. And the primary features of leg 2, really across the Celtic Sea, is looking for the weather features, what we're expecting to happen on a synoptic scale, whether it's a weather front, if there's a stalled weather system, it might be quite consistent on the way across, but as we'll see in a minute, there's actually, there's quite a bit of variance that we can see on this leg. I don't even look at the return leg until we've reached Fastnet Rock because it can be quite sensitive to your timing arriving there. At leg 3, back from Fastnet Rock, There are a couple of options. Typically the shortest distance usually pays off, but there's maybe a couple of reasons that you might want to explore other avenues around the TSS. And then leg 4, which is probably one of the more contentious legs of the race, where tides can come into play. There are a couple of options around going north and south of the Casquettes, but so I'd break it down and view this race very much as 4 legs, a little bit loosely around coming and going from the Scillies. So what does this mean in terms of weather for the event? Doing a bit of historic weather study can help you sort of plan what the race is going to look like for you. And I do this every Fastnet that I've done, because the boats are a slightly different performance curve, which means you've got different amounts of hours on the race course in different areas. These wind roses here I plucked for the last week of July, basically from 2010 through to 2024. And what we've got here is hopefully you're reasonably familiar with these wind roses. The Christchurch Bay, for example, is predominantly southwest, and you can have anything from, you know, on a percentage basis, anything from sort of sub 8 knots to well above 28 to 30 knots. If we look at the same time period from the southwest, if we look at the same time period for the Isles of Scilly, it's evident that it's actually more in the westerly quadrant rather than the southwesterly quadrant. And then if we take a look at Fastnet Rock, again, it's more westerly, but across the broad range of conditions. This is the averages across all of these, across that 14 years. And then Cherbourg, there's a little bit of a correlation to Cherbourg and to Christchurch Bay, that it's slightly more left or slightly more southwesterly on average, whereas Fastnet Rock and the Scillies are more westerly on average. So there's a general trend to be more west the further west you are.
I'm not liking this. What you're saying is, as we head out and we turn right, the wind turns right.
Yeah, yeah. The waypoint indicator at the top of the mast, basically. Yeah, exactly. So these are the average conditions, and what I can do with these conditions, I will run a weather study over the whole race. Then this is an example of all the possible routes with a Sunfast 3600. And just summing it out, we know that the average time for the race is 4 days and 1 hour. I actually discounted, I think 2011, because it was an extremely slow example. It was well over 5 days and didn't want that to skew the results that I'm looking at. You can't really draw any conclusions from this. There are a lot of options and you have to keep an open mind. If we go on to the next slide, what I've done for each one of those races, I've just put this up as an example for you. This is the 2023 race, and this is a true wind direction coming down on the top axis. So the long red bar is at 35 degrees true wind angle on port, and it's scaled by hours. So this is the number of hours. So this race has spent the most number of hours at one angle at 35 true on port, but there's also a spread of hours going downwind on starboard. So if we move on to the next slide, we do this for every year. What becomes quite apparent is no 2 years are the same. There's no particular pattern which evolves. So what we can do is take a look at, we can average all of these together to find out what the sort of the typical conditions, what are the bounds of the conditions what we would see if we averaged across all the years. If we go to the next slide, what we see is, well, this is just another method of plotting the same information, but it tells a slightly different story. All of the coloured bars represent a different year, so all the way on the left is the upwind angles. We've got tide reaching next to that, broad reaching next to that, and then on the right, downwind. So you can see, even in the downwind hours, there's a huge difference between the sort of the most number of hours and the minimum number of hours for each one of those races. So if I just average them out, I've got an average there in percentage of hours. So upwind, it's, on average 37% of the time on the race is upwind. Downwind, kind of similar, about 30%, but the two reaching angles come together is 30%. So you can effectively presume that the amount of time you spent upwind, reaching and downwind is equal on average across the race itself.
Is this a bit like going to a venue when half the time there's no wind, half the time it's 25 knots,
Yes.
and then you go thinking it's going to be 12 and a half?
Yeah, exactly. Well, what it tells us is that there's no, as we saw from the roses before, there's no distinct pattern. All options are on the table, but predominantly it's going to be that southwesterly and westerly axis. But we take that data, and on the left, the matrix you see is increasing true wind speed up the rows and increasing true wind angle to the right across the rows. And I've got hours, I've colorised them to sort of highlight a few points. What we can see there, and the beauty of this is this can be directly correlated to the sail crossover chart beside it. So what we can see from there is you need to have a good concentration in your upwind angles, and because you're spending the majority of your time there, but you also have the downwind angles where it needs a lot of concentration, and the average range of wind speeds across the race historically in the sort of the 12 to 14 knot range, 10 to 14 knot range. So this sort of highlights, and what we can do is take from this, the different boats and different performance curves would show a slightly different picture, but we can take this and directly overlay it onto that sail crossover chart, and will help you focus on what are the important sails I really need to think about for an average race I need to be mostly prepared for. But going back and looking at all the wind races, you can't discount all the other possibilities which might come up. It helps to focus your resources on where you're going to invest time and energy and money on sails.
So what I'm taking from that is it's not an easy race to predict.
No.
And because you turn right, however many degrees, how many degrees do you turn right at the Scillies?
It's 30 degrees or something.
Because we turn right at the Scillies, slightly more than the wind turns right at the Scillies, there's a chance of some reaching angles as well as essentially in a predominantly westerly wind, upwind, downwind. The only thing that seems certain is you're going to get quite a lot of upwind.
Yes, in terms of hours. Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of hours, that's important.
So it's important that
hours, not
it's
miles.
yeah, because you're reaching and running a lot faster than you are sailing upwind. In terms of miles, it would actually skew it slightly differently, but render it sort of a time-on-time basis. So I think hours are quite relevant.
Okay, we haven't heard much from Ronan, and I'm sure many of you here love to debate IRC and sales, and with the knowledge that you've got to be fast in everything now. Campbell, thank you for that. Ronan, can you share some of your knowledge with the group in terms of sail wardrobes for the Fastnet? Obviously you work with customers doing the race, so you've got a bit of inside track on how many people are thinking, but also you work with the IRC a lot.
Okay, so moving, if we were to go back one page for a sec, just to help frame the conversation. For me, just looking at the sail crossover chart and the historical data, it tells me that essentially you need a J2, A2, and that's all you need. So
you need 4 of them.
So isn't that great for everyone? Unfortunately, or fortunately, the conditions are never going to be the same. I think we've pointed out that there's a huge variance in the wind. The averages say that it's going to be 11, 12 knots, and it's going to be lovely conditions. We can't get drawn into the fact that that's an average. When we started the last race for the previous 2 years, the boats that have done best have actually started on storm cells, got through the first 10 hours of the race, and protected their assets to when the wind got to a condition where they can start racing again. So seamanship is really, really important, and I think that has to be addressed as well. So if we just go back to sail choices, so the conversation is framed around, I think the majority of the people that we're talking to here are in the 35 to 40 foot market, mostly in class 3. The sail crossover chart that we used was a Sunfast 3600 pertinent to Griffin, which is going to be going during the race, but also again a good boat to talk about, because that particular boat can be set up with symmetric setup or a sail setup. So we can talk around that in the next couple of slides. One thing I want to point out is there is generally a tendency for people to want to reduce their IRC number. It's really, really prevalent that people feel that you have to drive your number down. The little graph on the right-hand side of the screen is from the IRC rating office. This shows you what each head sail costs you for a given boat size. So 2 years ago there was a change where you now get rated for both spinnakers and head sails. I really want to try and get across to people, don't focus on reducing your head sail number to get your rating down, because I think it will be at the detriment of having a good setup and having the right sails on board. Most of the customers here that we have already invested in really nice sails, and they sit in their garage because you feel that you don't want to bring them. I really want to get across that having the right sails on board is really important, and also having redundancy. If you blow up your A2, what's the next sail you're going to put up? If you blow up your light jib because you say, oh, I can get around this headland, it's only a sea breeze gust. If it blows up, are you going to do the rest of your race on a J4? Hopefully not, but don't make big decisions based on a rating number. Are we really happy with that? Another part of the sail choice decision, which is a difficult one to talk about, but there's been a big change in the way that storm sails and heavy weather sails are now rated. Previously, they could be dual purpose sails. There has been an update in the rule that says primary purpose for these sails. We see a lot of boats out there, primarily the high performance boats, that have a storm jib, which is their GS, and your Genoa stay sail could be your heavy weather jib. That has now changed, that your storm jib has to be used in Beaufort Force 8 in its primary condition. And your heavy weather jib has to be Beaufort Force 6, which is 27 knots. So just be mindful of that as well in any of the decisions that are being made. Those sails are outside of your IRC allowance, but have to be factored in.
Sorry, Ronan, just to clarify, you could still use that storm jib as an example as a staysail, but it must be strong enough to be your storm jib, because ultimately it's about safety.
Absolutely. So from a sailmaker's point of view, we will always endeavour, we will make the sail strong enough to be used in those conditions. In that first video, you might have noticed that there was a 3300 coming out of the Solent with their storm jib up. That was hoisted as a furling sail, which is a dual purpose sail, to a 8mm halyard on a staysail position. There was massive forestay sag, or essentially what is the forestay when you're on your storm jib. It's not just the sail, the boat has to be able to be used in the correct conditions. The tack point for that sail, I know because I'm involved with the 3300s, but they have tie downs specifically to be used in that scenario. There is a certain amount of boat building that needs to be addressed as well in order to do these dual purposes, and it's a grey area. There's no case studies for this yet. I'm sure there will be coming in the future, but as we are now, I strongly feel that from a safety point of view, these two pictures here are what's intended for your storm jibs. So the party line is, we would like to see that safety is a priority. If there is a dual aspect to the sail, it's its secondary means of use. Okay. Then we get into...
Hold on, can I take you back? There was a picture there with a boat with loads of sails up. What's that all about?
So we'll get into this in a second, but essentially this is the reason that IRC, or the rating office, brought in rating the number of head sails. So there was a little bit of pushback a number of years ago when certain boats that are high performance boats, so if you're sailing with your apparent wind quite far forward, multiple head sails will be faster than having a big masthead code 0 at reaching angles. I suppose the reason for that is smaller, flatter sails are more efficient. If you can get the tack positions and the sheeting angles of all of those sails appropriately set up, the boat is just a lot more efficient, more balanced, unloaded, it's better on the gear, and the boat ultimately goes faster. So it's really become a big thing in more high performance boats like the Fast 40s, TP52s and whatnot. In saying that, a 3600, so the Griffin boat for instance has a jib top, and invariably the 3600 as an example doesn't have a fractional halyard. So they only have an option to have a masthead IRC 75% traditional zero, and their heavy air setup then needs to be a jib top because they don't have a fractional option for a zero. So again, boat specific, so without getting into too much detail, there is different ways to set your boat up for a range of conditions. I suppose if we move on a little bit, in talking about sail choices, IRC tried to address this by another introduction of the rule, where they now allow you to rate. It mainly came in because of the class 40s who are predominantly sailing a lot of IRC events now as well. The Figaro 3, they had a sail which was a 62 or 65% mid-girth sail and was illegal a few years ago in IRC and is now a rated sail. The benefit of that sail is it's considerably flatter than a sail that has to rate as a spinnaker. So in terms of technicalities, a 60% mid-girth sail, the mid-stripe needs to be 60% of its foot length, and on a 75% sail, it's considerably longer, so therefore the sail is deeper and more draggy. The benefit of that sail is it's much, much better at reaching at tighter angles, and for some boats, it's really effective. So for instance, like a J109, a lot of the J109s used to be Genoa boats. They've now re-rated to get the rating down in our jib boats. They're underpowered when they go crack sheets and go reaching. The rating implication of this sail is approximately 6 points for that size boat. The difference in rating between the Genoa setup and the jib setup is 15 to 18 points. So it's half the rating hit and probably 80% of the performance. So it's a really, really valid sail, but there's been no uptake. Again, I feel that there's a general hesitancy for people to increase their rating and don't want to take the rating hit, for which I really do feel this sail within the next few years will become more and more popular across the board. Once a couple of people jump, lots of people will follow.
Is that instead of a normal zero as we know it, or as well as?
I think once people start using this sail, they won't build 75% girth sails anymore.
Okay.
And compared to a jib top or a triple head sail boat, because triple head you're talking 3 points effectively. If you paid for each, well, you're only paying for 2 of the lines, you're paying talking about 2 points. That you said is 6 points.
Yeah.
And it's just a different wind angle, or is there a big crossover between a 60% girth and a jib top or triple head?
So again, depending on the boat and the setup, but if you were to look at it in separate parts of the crossover chart, this particular sail will be your predominantly 0 to 14, 0 to 15 knot sail, where you're still hunting for power, you're trying to tip the boat over, you're trying to sail upwind, whereas your jib top becomes the more uprange sail where you're 14 knots to 20, 25. So they're both in the inventory. Yeah, let's go on with that. And then just adding to that, so this is a picture of Kestrel, who won the Nav Tower, I think, a couple of years ago. Yeah. I just wanted to point this out, that again, using the effective sails for the powering of the boat. So this is a fractional code 0 in windy conditions with a reef in the main, and also putting their staysail up inside it to balance the boat. The biggest and most important part of this for me is when you're reaching, it's not about, it's pretty windy here, But where they're really, really well set up is they've got all the power forward. They can really drive the boat hard by reducing your helm load, and they're double-handed. They've done a really nice job of getting the boat set up, and obviously went on to win that race. So the contrast in these two pictures was interesting to me. It's great when it's windy, but one of the other things is when the wind drops, I don't think that we as race crew do a good job at reefing early enough. So when it gets windy, balancing the boat by reefing early is really, really important. But also, as the wind drops, this was the Fastnet line bay the following morning after it being really, really windy. Everybody's a bit shell-shocked. Getting rid of reefs early is really important as well. So the powering of the boat, I think, is something to be aware of.
Yeah, I would very much concur with that, and I'd include myself in that. I think the general tendency, maybe you'll agree in the room as well, is we reef too late and then we unreef too late. You know, so just staying ahead of the game is so important, isn't it? In offshore sailing, in any race, that, you know, what's our next sail? What's our next move? What do we do if the wind drops? When are we going to unreef? You know, just always thinking, what is our next sail? What's our next move? And very often you can manage the power with the reefs, and so that means being good at reefing, and it's something worth practicing. You know, if you can be efficient at reefing, you're less nervous about doing it, because if you're not good at it, you know, it can lead to a rip sail. It can lead to, you know, it can lead to the end of the race if you're not careful. So get good at reefing, and my advice is don't be afraid to reef, and don't be afraid to shake them out.
So I'm going to ask Hugh to just go back a couple of slides. So again, just getting back to sail choices. So I put this one.
You need all of these, right?
Yes, I put this one up. So we only need a J2, but we need a lot of spinnakers. I jest. Essentially, there's a myriad of different sails that you can have for different angles. Again, I really do feel that it's boat dependent, and also making decisions on redundancy. So one of the things that I think is really, really important is having good crossovers in your sails. So in terms of your downwind inventory, when I've been involved with the double-handed boats in particular, we would generally favour having an A15, because it's versatile in that it's good in light airs, but it's built a little bit stronger than having a really flat A1, and that will get you up to 14, well, in reality, 16, 18, 20 when it does.
You lose your warranty.
Yeah. But then that comes into butting up with an A4, and the decisions that people make are based around where the boat is strong, where the boat is weak, and I suppose I just wanted to show that there is so many different options here. There's never going to be the right answer for everybody. I want to feel that we're approachable. Come and talk to us about your setup, and we can hopefully help you in making the right decisions to both be efficient in sail choices, but also whether you need a spinnaker pole or not. I know in the 3600, the split, there's probably going to be 20 3600s in this race, and I would imagine the split will be 50-50 between pole and fixed centerline spray. So there is no right answer. It depends how you sail your boat, what the routing is. The reaching legs, obviously A sails will be better. If you get a long VMG run, you're going to love having a spinnaker pole. So it's horses for courses. And then similarly upwind, having a good range of jib is really, really important. Obviously, both crude and short-handed, you don't want to be doing multiple jib changes. There's been a big advance in sail technology recently where you can do load sharing now. Load sharing helix technology really, really helps adapt the shape of sails. So by using either your halyard or your tack tension to flatten a sail over a range of conditions, gives you a much wider range on that sail. So if we are talking about a J2, we can make a J2 that's much, much deeper, and therefore as you wind on your halyard, you can flatten the camber of that sail and get you through a range of 6 knots through to 16 or 18, whereas in the old days you would have had to have 2 jibs to get across that range. It's a really, really nice addition that the sails offer, and that again makes it easier to make decisions on the additional sails that I feel that you would potentially take, whether that is a jib top, a staysail. Staysails are really, really important for balancing the boat, for taking helm off. So if you're short-handed on an autopilot, if you can balance the boat by putting in a staysail inside your jib when you're reaching, it's just much, much easier on the autopilot. And also if you're driving, it's easier for the helmsperson. So
there's difficult choices here, isn't there? Campbell's proved that we don't know what the weather's going to be. Ronan wants us to have contingency, and so large crossovers in our sails, but he's also saying you need to be able to sail all points. So I guess to the panel, how would you decide whether you're going to give yourself a range or whether you're going to give yourself redundancy? Because you can't do both, because then your handicap will be too high.
I feel that don't chase the rating down. I feel it's important not to chase the rating down. If we just go back 1 or 2 slides again to the number of points that it costs, it's negligible. For a boat that rates in the region of 1,000, it's 2.6 seconds per hour for 1 point. So over the course of 4 days, if you're sailing with the right sail for an hour or 2, you will far outweigh that 1 point hit. And again, the redundancy aspect of it is, if you do blow up your only A2 on board, what are you going to use instead? So don't be afraid to have the right sails on board and let your rating potentially inflate a little bit to have the right tools to race effectively.
I would maybe say, as a short-handed sailor or the bowman in the room, that maybe you would want less sails and less manoeuvres and less time on the bow and doing jib peels, and having a J2 that kind of takes you from 0 to 18 would be very nice, or even further than that. Yeah.
And again, I think that is still the case. Where I'm kind of getting to is the other sails that a lot of people have invested over the previous years. So prior to the IRC rule change coming in, a lot of people invested in spinnaker staysails, Genoa staysails. I know a lot of my customers now leave those sails in the garage. Please utilise your investments. I think it's important that you enjoy your boats. When those sails are up, they're definitely bringing performance to you, and don't feel that the IRC does a really, really good job of rating you for what you have. It's highly unlikely that taking that 1 point will make the difference in your race, but not having the right sail at the right time will more so be a factor.
Is that everything on sails? I think there was, when it all goes wrong, look at that. And when it all goes wrong, we can make you a repair kit. I think the thing about this is take useful stuff, right? Every sail has a different way of repairing it. So it's just about contingency. It comes back to that what ifs, if this happens, how are we going to fix it? It's not a long race, but it's a long enough race that you need to be able to repair stuff. So making sure that you've got the right materials, and if you need advice on that, then certainly come and talk to us, and we can help advise you, or we can help source what you need. So looking ahead then, there we go, we've got a sales order deadline. Just in case you do think you do need some sales, just a heads up, we can't make them in 24 hours. They take a bit of time. You've got to pay your entry fee, all the OSR checklist, and of course there's all the other commitments that we've talked about for crew training. I have to say the crew training is one of the best team building exercises as well. Looking back at the ocean race, there's nothing like trying to help each other in and out of a life raft to actually start to build a team.
Or pushing people out of the life.
Or pushing people out of the life raft, yeah. The IRC rating is suitably long enough before the start date that you can't base your sail decision around your weather forecast, unless your weather forecast is better than any that I've found to date, apart from Campbell's, of course. Yeah, so just before we peel the questions then, I'm just going to put you guys on the spot. So, just what would be your top tips? We've heard about boat preparation, we've heard about crew preparation, team building, navigation planning, weather prediction, sail inventories. So, Hugh, give us a top tip for the Fastnet race.
So I think I took here the untested equipment I mentioned earlier, and would say it again, but equally testing it in the right environments. Like one of our incidences when we had this new bowsprit, we tested it quite a lot in 12 knots, and then we took it offshore in some serious stuff for the Fastnet, and then we realised there was problems. So yeah, test out your equipment. Nothing new for the start of the Fastnet, but equally trying to take it into some serious conditions to get it broken in.
And Ronan?
Just getting back to reefing, take safety seriously. Yes, we can do dual purpose sails. Primary purpose has to be it's a safety item, and that's paramount to what we're all trying to achieve. We all want to be safe, we want to have fun. Make sure you get really, really good at reefing, both in and out, quickly.
And safety is an important thing you mentioned there. There's all aspects to that. I would add to that the importance of doing proper drills. So it's all very well going out in 6 knots and throwing a fender in the water, shouting man overboard and kind of turning around and picking it up. But, have you done it with the spinnaker up in the dark in 20 knots? Because it might happen. That's when you're most likely to fall over the side. I have done it, and I've not found the fender, and it was quite a wake-up call for myself and my crew. And we realised that we had to completely rethink how we went about it. And we'd done our sea survival courses. This was just a real-life test, and it made us realise actually how much we still had to learn. And it's very boat-specific. So if you've done it on one boat, doesn't mean you've done it on all boats. So I really would recommend that the safety aspect that you mentioned, Ronan, I concur with that. Campbell?
Yeah, I extend on that. As part of CPR racing, we have to do a drill for every race per man overboard, and even with a very experienced CPR crew, it took 25 minutes to get the boat manoeuvred back properly to collect person in benign conditions. Admittedly, there was some lack of urgency, but took 3
It took 15 minutes to put your rosé there.
My top tip really is yeah, fair enough. Is I personally operate on checklists. I have a list of things that I must have with me and take on the race, and I check every morning that I have got. It's simple things like my copy of the sailing instructions, and I've got my check notes or a race plan. It's a wet notes pencil. Check I've got the binoculars in it, they're working. Turn the instruments on and make sure that the wind speed and angle that you're reading is actually correct, because you might not notice it if you're not looking at it, motoring out a handle, for example, and all of a sudden, oh, that doesn't add up. So it's this checklist. It's like a pre-flight checklist. Every pilot gets on the same plane week in, week out, and they have a pre-flight checklist that they go through and they touch the switches and make sure everything's working. Then we just end up with no surprises. So that's my top tip. And it's evolving all the time.
It's
when I
good
forget
one.
something and I add it to the list, I need to check that next time.
As I said, I sailed with Campbell this year, and we did one race in Saint-Tropez, and we led around the top mark, we turned around going downwind, and we were going to go back through the start line.
It wasn't a start line.
And we both looked at each other and said, are we allowed to go through the start line? And then we both went white, and it wasn't on Campbell's checklist. So we were in complete disarray. But fortunately it wasn't the start line, because all the boats because the flag had been taken down. There we go. But anyway, yeah, make a checklist. And mine then, so mine for the Fastnet, things I've done wrong. I've done too many things wrong. But I would say be very careful pre-start, and don't let the red mist descend in the first 5 hours of the race. I've damaged a sail exiting the Solent, and then needed that sail for 24 hours later in the race and didn't have it. Needlessly, we could have just slowed down, throttled back, changed the sail. You're unlikely to win the race in the first few hours, but you can lose yourself the whole race. Well-known navigators and boats have hit ledges going out. or the spit exiting the needles. I very nearly got stuck on the shingles on a TP52, embarrassingly, in light winds. So I would say just be really careful and mindful that it's a long race. Don't let the red mist descend. I think it is a marathon, not a sprint. 4 days, say, on an average boat is quite a long time. So look after your gear, pace yourself, and try and avoid the heroics in the first sort of 5 or 6 hours of the race would be my advice. Remind me of that in July.
I'd like to touch on that point actually, the no heroics. But I think something that came up in our Griffin training last weekend was, we were racing pretty close to each other, and actually, if you're tacking out of the Solent and you are that port boat and you're ducking the boat on starboard, give them an extra, half boat length or something. It doesn't take much to just nip your bowsprit into a pulpit or something. There wasn't any collisions at the weekend, but maybe we need that diamond from the America's Cup or something around boats just for the Solent, so we can give each other a little bit more room. Because I've seen a few port starboard collisions on the way out, and it's pretty sad when you are the one on starboard to get your race ruined by something like that. So no heroics, please. Keep well away from Griffin.
Thanks very much, particularly Campbell, for joining us, as he's not a part of the North Sails family, or not yet anyway.
Native.
North Sails are very proud of our relationship with RORC, particularly proud of the support that we give the Griffin project. And for those of you going out racing in the Easter Regatta, I'm looking forward to being on the water with some of my peers coaching on the water as well. Wish good luck to anybody who's racing tomorrow, early to bed now, for those of you who are racing in the morning. And just finally, big thank you to Louis for doing the IT and making sure that this can be shared far more widely. Thank you very much, everybody.